What if I told you that Stranger Things wasn't just inspired by 80s nostalgia and Steven Spielberg films? What if the Hawkins National Laboratory, the experiments on children, the alternate dimensions, what if it was all based on something that allegedly happened right here in our world? Welcome to Camp Hero. Welcome to Montauk. Welcome to the darkest conspiracy theory you've never heard of. Some of what you're about to hear has never been proven, but all of it has been claimed by people who say they were there, people who say they survived it. And once you hear their stories, you'll never watch Stranger Things the same way again. Long Island, New York, 1980s. At the eastern tip of the island, where the land meets the Atlantic Ocean, stands Camp Hero, a decommissioned Air Force base that locals avoid after dark. The centerpiece is impossible to miss, a massive radar tower, the AN/FPS-35, rising like a monument to Cold War paranoia. But beneath that tower, beneath the crumbling barracks and overgrown bunkers, something was allegedly happening. Something the government will never acknowledge. They called it the Montauk Project. According to whistleblowers and alleged survivors, this wasn't just another Cold War installation. Between 1971 and 1983, Camp Hero supposedly became ground zero for experiments that would make MKUltra look like a high school science fair. We're talking about mind control, psychological warfare, time travel, interdimensional portals, and the systematic abuse of children with psychic abilities. The project allegedly had unlimited black budget funding, no oversight, and complete deniability. It was run by a shadow group within the military-industrial complex, people who believed that the next war wouldn't be fought with bullets and bombs, but with minds and dimensions we couldn't yet comprehend. Sound familiar? The Duffer Brothers have never explicitly confirmed the connection, but the parallels are impossible to ignore. Hawkins National Laboratory and Camp Hero, Dr. Brenner and the alleged Montauk scientists, 11 and the Montauk boys, the Upside Down and the alternate dimensions supposedly accessed beneath Long Island. Even the timeline matches. Stranger Things is set in 1983, the exact year the Montauk Project allegedly reached its catastrophic conclusion. But here's where it gets darker. Much, much darker. Because unlike Stranger Things, where the kids eventually win and the monsters can be fought, the Montauk Project, if it existed, represents something far more terrifying. The monsters were us, and they were wearing government badges. To understand Montauk, we need to go back further. October 28, 1943, the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. World War II is raging, and the United States is desperate for any technological advantage. Enter the Philadelphia Experiment, another alleged black project that sounds like pure science fiction, except for the disturbing number of witnesses who claim they saw it happen. The experiment supposedly involved the USS Eldridge, a naval destroyer escort. Using massive electromagnetic field generators based on Einstein's unified field theory, the Navy allegedly attempted to make the ship invisible to enemy radar. The technology worked. But something went catastrophically, impossibly wrong. According to witnesses on nearby ships, the Eldridge didn't just vanish from radar. It physically disappeared in a flash of green light, teleported 200 miles away to Norfolk, Virginia, remained visible there for several minutes, then reappeared back in Philadelphia. But the crew paid the price for humanity's hubris. Some sailors were allegedly fused into the ship's hull, their bodies embedded in the metal, still alive, still screaming. Others went violently insane, attacking their fellow crew members or jumping overboard. Some reportedly caught fire spontaneously, and others, perhaps the most disturbing, allegedly vanished entirely or began phasing in and out of visibility, stuck between dimensions for the rest of their shortened lives. One survivor, Carlos Allende, sent letters to astronomer Morris K. Jessup in the 1950s, describing the experiment in detail. Jessup was found dead in his car in 1959, ruled a suicide, though conspiracy theorists point out the timing was suspiciously convenient. The Navy has consistently denied the Philadelphia experiment ever happened. They've produced documents showing the Eldridge was nowhere near Philadelphia on that date. But here's the thing about black projects. Plausible deniability is the whole point. And according to Montauk conspiracy theorists, the government didn't abandon the research after the Philadelphia disaster. They learned from it, they refined it, they perfected it, and 30 years later they moved the entire operation to a remote base on Long Island, where they could continue their work away from prying eyes. The Philadelphia experiment opened a door. Montauk walked through it. This is where the story becomes almost unbearable. This is where alleged government research crosses into systematic child abuse, and this is where the Stranger Things parallels become impossible to dismiss. Preston Nichols, Al Bielek, Stuart Swerdlow, these men claim they were there. They claim they were part of it, either as participants or as victims whose memories were suppressed and later recovered. Their testimonies, given independently over decades, paint a picture of systematic horror that makes Hawkins Lab look merciful by comparison. According to these alleged survivors, the Montauk Project needed test subjects. Specifically, they needed children. Young minds are more malleable, more psychically sensitive, less likely to resist the conditioning. So they recruited, or more accurately, they abducted. Runaways from New York City, orphans from state facilities, street kids from broken homes, children no one would miss, children the system had already forgotten. They were brought to Camp Hero and tested for latent psychic abilities, telepathy, telekinesis, remote viewing, precognition. Most failed the tests and were allegedly returned to the streets with their memories wiped. But those who showed promise? They disappeared into the underground levels of Camp Hero. And that's where the real experiments began. The children, they called them the Montauk Boys, were subjected to electromagnetic torture designed to fracture their psyches and create dissociative states. They were placed in sensory deprivation tanks for days at a time. They were given experimental drugs, LSD, PCP, and compounds that don't appear in any medical literature. They underwent psychological conditioning that would break down their sense of self and rebuild them as psychic weapons. Preston Nichols describes a process called phase locking, where a child's brain waves would be synchronized with powerful electromagnetic fields generated by the modified radar tower. This would supposedly amplify their psychic abilities 1,000-fold, but at tremendous cost. Many children didn't survive the process. Those who did were never the same. The goal? To create psychic soldiers who could spy on Soviet installations without leaving Long Island, who could manipulate matter with their minds, who could remote view enemy facilities in real time. And ultimately, this is where it enters truly dark territory, who could open doorways to other dimensions, other timelines, other realities. Nichols claims he was the technical director, managing the equipment and the electromagnetic systems. He describes a massive underground facility beneath Camp Hero, extending 5 levels deep into the earth. The upper levels housed the scientists and military personnel. The middle levels contained the experimental equipment. And in the lower levels, in a room lined with electromagnetic shielding, there was a chair. The Montauk chair, a psychic amplification device that would change everything. Imagine a dentist chair, but larger, surrounded by coils and electromagnetic field generators, covered in sensors and electrodes. This was the Montauk chair, the crown jewel of the entire project. The chair was allegedly designed by a team that included scientists who had worked on the Philadelphia experiment. It would take a psychic's thoughts, their conscious and subconscious mind, and amplify them through the massive radar tower above. But it didn't just amplify thoughts. It could supposedly manifest them into physical reality. Think about that for a moment. A child strapped into this device, their consciousness amplified 1,000-fold, their deepest thoughts and darkest fears given solid form in our reality. According to Preston Nichols, they tested the chair extensively. They had psychics manifest simple objects first, a cup, a ball, a book. Then more complex things. They could create temporary structures. They could allegedly open portals through time, sending people forward and backward through history. But the star subject, the one they called Duncan Cameron, was something special. Duncan was allegedly one of the most powerful psychics ever tested. When placed in the Montauk chair, he could do things that shouldn't be possible. He could materialize complex objects that would remain stable for hours. He could open portals not just through time, but through space, doorways to other places, other dimensions. But here's the problem with amplifying someone's entire consciousness. You don't just amplify their conscious thoughts, you amplify everything, their subconscious, their fears, their nightmares, and you can't always control what comes through. Nichols describes an incident in August of 1983, the same year and month that Stranger Things is set, when something went catastrophically wrong. Duncan was in the chair, deep in a psychic trance, when his subconscious manifested something from another dimension. They called it the Beast from the Id, a reference to the 1956 film Forbidden Planet, where a scientist's subconscious creates an invisible monster. But this beast wasn't invisible. Witnesses describe it as massive, somewhere between 8 and 10 feet tall, covered in matted fur or hair, with claws that could tear through steel. Some say it looked like a grotesque hybrid of human and animal. Others claim it was something that couldn't exist in our reality, something that hurt to look at directly. It allegedly materialized in the lower levels of the facility and immediately went on a rampage. It killed at least one technician. Some accounts say more. It destroyed equipment worth millions of dollars. It was hunting, moving through the corridors with terrifying intelligence and purpose. The security teams couldn't stop it. Bullets passed through it or had no effect. It wasn't entirely solid. It was something between dimensions, something that existed in multiple states simultaneously. The project leaders faced an impossible choice. They could try to contain it and risk it escaping to the surface, or they could shut down the entire project and hope that severing the connection would send it back to wherever it came from. They chose the latter. On August 12, 1983, they destroyed the Montauk chair. They shut down the electromagnetic generators. They severed all power to the lower levels, and according to witnesses, the beast simply faded, like it had never existed at all. But the damage was done. The project was compromised. Too many people had seen something that couldn't be explained, so they made the decision to shut down Montauk permanently. Camp Hero was officially decommissioned in 1984. The underground levels were sealed. The equipment was destroyed or relocated, and every person involved was allegedly subjected to memory suppression techniques to ensure they would never speak about what they'd seen. The Demogorgon, the Mind Flayer, the Shadow, Monster, the Beast from the Id. Are these just a weird case of parallel storytelling? Or did the Duffer Brothers know something? Now, let's be clear about something important. There is no concrete, verifiable evidence that the Montauk Project existed as described. No government documents have been declassified. No physical proof has been produced. No official investigation has ever confirmed these allegations. The official record shows Camp Hero was simply a Cold War radar installation, part of the SAGE defense system, that was decommissioned due to budget cuts and technological obsolescence. But here's what we do know. And this is where the story gets genuinely unsettling. Camp Hero exists. It's real. You can visit it today. It's now a state park open to the public. The underground tunnels exist. They're acknowledged by the state of New York, though they claim they're just old ammunition bunkers and storage facilities. But multiple explorers who've accessed the tunnels before they were sealed describe them extending far deeper than official blueprints suggest. The base was decommissioned in 1981, then mysteriously reactivated. Official records show it was closed, then suddenly reopened for unknown purposes until final decommissioning in 1984. Why? What happened during those 3 years? Multiple witnesses have come forward with similar stories. Preston Nichols, Al Bielek, Stuart Swerdlow, and others have given testimony that, while impossible to verify, contains eerily consistent details about the facility layout, the personnel, the equipment, and the experiments. These men never met before going public. Yet their stories align in disturbing ways. The radar tower is genuinely unusual. The AN/FPS-35 was one of the most powerful radar systems ever built. It was designed for long-range detection, but conspiracy theorists point out that its power output was far beyond what would be necessary for simple radar. Could it have been modified for other purposes? The equipment was completely stripped when the base closed, unusual for a simple decommissioning. The government has a documented history of unethical experiments. This is not speculation, this is fact. MKUltra subjected unwitting Americans to LSD and psychological torture. The Tuskegee experiment let black men die of syphilis for decades. Project Artichoke explored mind control techniques. Operation Midnight Climax dosed citizens with drugs in CIA-run brothels. When the government says, "We would never do that," history proves otherwise. And then there's the testimony of local residents. People who lived near Camp Hero in the 1970s and 80s report strange occurrences. Unusual lights in the sky. Electromagnetic interference that would shut down car engines near the base. Children who went missing and were never found. Homeless people who would wander too close to Camp Hero and return different, unable to remember where they'd been. The tower still stands today, rusted and abandoned, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean like a skeletal finger pointing at secrets we're not meant to know. And those underground levels? Still sealed, officially because of structural instability. But locals will tell you, don't go to Camp Hero after dark. Don't try to access the sealed tunnels, because some doors, once opened, should never be reopened. When asked about Montauk, the Duffer Brothers have been carefully evasive, and that evasiveness is almost more telling than an outright confirmation would be. Here's what we know for certain. Early in development, Stranger Things was titled Montauk. Not as a working title, but as the actual name of the show. The original pitch Bible explicitly referenced the Montauk conspiracy theory. The setting was Long Island. The story was about government experiments on psychic children at a secret facility. Then, suddenly, everything changed. The name became Stranger Things. The setting moved from Long Island to the fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana. The Montauk references were scrubbed from promotional materials. Why? The official explanation is creative evolution, that they wanted more freedom to tell their story without being tied to a specific real-world location and conspiracy theory. But others whisper about legal concerns, about pressure from parties who didn't want the old stories dredged up again, about the possibility that Netflix's legal team advised them to distance the show from anything that could be construed as defamatory toward real people or institutions. Some conspiracy theorists go further. They suggest that someone, perhaps someone who was actually involved in the alleged Montauk Project, reached out to the Duffer Brothers and asked them to change the name. Not as a threat, but as a request. Because bringing mainstream attention to Montauk might lead people to start asking questions that powerful people don't want answered. But despite the name change, The DNA remains, and it's impossible to miss once you know what to look for. The laboratory, Hawkins National Laboratory and Camp Hero. Both government facilities conducting secret experiments, both hidden in plain sight. The children with powers. 11 and the Montauk boys. Both taken as children. Both subjected to psychological torture and experimental procedures. Both used as weapons. The alternate dimension, the Upside Down, and the alleged dimensions accessed at Montauk. Both reached through scientific experimentation, both containing creatures that shouldn't exist. The 1983 setting. Stranger Things begins in November 1983. The Montauk Project allegedly ended in August 1983. Is this coincidence, or is the show picking up where the real story supposedly ended? The sensory deprivation tank. 11 uses it to enhance her powers. The Montauk boys were allegedly subjected to sensory deprivation for the same purpose. The electromagnetic equipment. The show features extensive electromagnetic apparatus in the lab. Montauk allegedly used the radar tower as a massive electromagnetic amplifier. The child with the shaved head. 11's iconic look. Preston Nichols describes the Montauk boys having their heads shaved as part of the conditioning process. The Duffer Brothers took the Montauk Project, filed off the serial numbers, wrapped it in 80s nostalgia and Spielbergian wonder, and gave us one of the most successful shows in streaming history. But what if they knew something? What if someone who was actually there consulted on the show off the record? What if the fiction is closer to fact than any of us are comfortable admitting? In interviews, when pressed about Montauk, the Duffer Brothers give carefully worded responses. They acknowledge the conspiracy theory inspired them. They admit they researched it extensively, but they always stop short of saying how much is based on real testimony versus pure imagination. And maybe that ambiguity is intentional. Maybe they want us to wonder. Maybe they want us to ask questions. Or maybe they're bound by agreements we'll never know about. Today, Camp Hero is a state park, Montauk Point State Park to be exact. You can visit, you can walk the grounds, explore the accessible bunkers, stand beneath that massive radar tower and feel its shadow fall across you like a cold hand. Tourists come for the views. Photographers come for the abandoned aesthetic. Ghost hunters come hoping to capture evidence of paranormal activity. But you can't access the deeper levels. Those remain sealed, locked behind heavy doors and warning signs. Officially, they're too dangerous. Structural instability, potential collapse, liability concerns. Or maybe there's something down there they don't want us to see. Maybe there's evidence that can't be explained away. Maybe there are rooms that still hum with residual electromagnetic energy. Maybe there are stains on concrete floors that tell stories the government will never acknowledge. The Montauk Project remains one of the most disturbing conspiracy theories in American history. Whether it's completely true, partially true, or entirely fabricated doesn't change one fundamental, documented fact. We know our government has conducted unethical experiments on unwitting citizens. MKUltra was real, and we only know about it because of a Freedom of Information Act request in 1977. How many other projects remain classified? Project Artichoke was real. Operation Midnight Climax was real. The Tuskegee experiment was real. The radiation experiments on prisoners and disabled children were real. So, when someone tells you the government would never experiment on children, never open doors that should stay closed, never pursue knowledge regardless of the human cost, never create monsters in the name of national security. Remember, Montauk. Remember that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones from other dimensions. They're the ones who believe the ends justify the means. The ones who see human beings as acceptable losses in pursuit of power. Remember that sometimes the monsters aren't in another dimension. Sometimes they're wearing lab coats. Sometimes they have security clearances. Sometimes they're operating with unlimited budgets and zero oversight. And sometimes they're still out there. Thanks for watching. If you've ever been to Camp Hero, if you've felt something off about that place, if you've experienced anything unusual near Montauk, leave a comment below. I read every single one. Because here's the thing about secrets. They want to be told. They want to come to light. And the more people who ask questions, the harder those secrets become to keep.